We're all individual parts of one whole. If we can remember that, like I will always say, um, an oak tree is massive in comparison to a daisy, but they both contribute to the ecosystem.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. What did you think the adult life would be like when you were a child? Did you, like me, hold a rosy view of joyfully climbing that ladder of success, having, quote unquote, it all, based upon narrow definitions of what society deemed success to be? Mine very much based upon the work hard, play hard mentality that now just makes me feel exhausted when I think about it. What I didn't expect was that my career would take the very best of me, to the detriment of me, my health, just ask my hypothyroid autoimmune, and my values, until the day that I said, enough. And my guest today is here to tell you that you have the agency to make a change in your life. Tamu Thomas is a leadership coach and the author of the brilliant Women Who Work Too Much, a book for our times as so many of us wake up to the fact that there is more to life than this exhausting, extractive, and inequitable business as usual. And as you hear in our conversation, yes, there are big systemic issues that need to change, but actually, there are little steps that we can each take for ourselves, for our community, and for nature, so that we can each be exactly the change that we need in this world. Tamu, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Tanya, thank you so much for having me. It is a joy to be here with you.
Oh, it's a joy to have you here on many, many levels. There is so much that you share through your socials that I'm just like, yes, 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 this is what we need in the world right now, as well as the theme of your brilliant book, Women Who Work Too Much. Just the title in itself speaks to me because ultimately that is the whole of my existence, I feel like. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
And Death on the Daily is a space where we speak to all of the ways that death and grief are really present for us in life. And I know you've got really, really interesting perspectives about something that I am pretty sure is going to resonate with a lot of people listening. So I just wanted to open up the space for you to share, Tamu, just what is coming up for you when it comes to that which you might be grieving in this life.
Oh my goodness. Tanya, like right into I love a deep end, but you've taken me right into the deep end. So there's two things that are present for me right now. One is grieving the notion of authenticity. And the reason I say that is because I recognize that a lot of my authenticity up until this minute, almost like a lot of my authenticity up until definitely this year of 2025 has been rooted in internalized conditioning, whether that is internalized, what I refer to as the oppressive trinity in my book. So whether that is internalized capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, whether that is how I internalized what I thought I should be as a professional person, as a mother, as a friend, as a sister. There are so many things that I recognize, especially as being a late diagnosed neurodiverse person, late diagnosed ADHD, diagnosed at 45. I recognized how a lot of my authenticity was based on coping as opposed to actually expressing. So if I'm talking about systems of oppression, the reverse of that for me would be systems of expression, and how my expression was limited according to these constructs I'd internalized. So that's something that's very alive with me. And something else that we've touched on before is I'm also grieving the promises of those systems. Those promises said, patriarchy said, okay, you might not live up to Eurocentric standards in many ways because you're a black woman, you've got afro hair, etc., but you're slim. It's not something I try to do. Uh, I've got genetics like my dad. He's always on like slim. So there were many promises of patriarchy, being slim, uh, being, attractive enough or attractive or whatever. Those things didn't equate to the things patriarchy said they would. Um, and white supremacy and capitalism together, even patriarchy to a degree. It's very much about if you get educated according to our structure and if you perform according to our structure, the promise is that you are in a meritocracy, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you will be able to make it, you will be able to be successful. Well, those things haven't been delivered either. And then I think about things like all of those systems together. If you work really, really hard all the time, if you're obsessed with your work, you think about it from morning to night, if you are never better than the last piece of work you've done, so you're always striving, you're always achieving, and you're inwardly ambitious, not too much externally because you're a woman, you shouldn't be too ambitious, that's a slight, then you will be rewarded with success. And once you've achieved enough of that success, you'll be able to have satisfaction. You'll be able to enjoy it. Well, it's not here, mate. Like, it's not here, babes. Like, that wasn't the truth. Actually, something very different enabled me to feel satiated, satisfied, and start to enjoy where I am now instead of waiting until this mythical place. So I'm grieving those because I really bought into that. I really bought into, I've got to find my own maladaptive ways of being able to work really hard, not knowing I'm a neurodiverse and my brain works differently. I've got to ram jam and force myself into this way of being, which led to like lots of nervous system dysregulation and burnout in order to be seen as worthy. I can be authentic according to what you believe my authenticity to be, and then you will give me the external validation necessary for me to consider myself as worthy. So it's like constant snacks rather than a banquet. So constant like grabbing and chasing and striving. And the sad truth is, Tanya, that actually got me quite far. That actually got me places. So whilst I'm grieving what they denied, I'm also grieving letting go of that and knowing that that way of operating, whether it was a quick fail or a quick win, I got a quick result. Whereas a different approach, it is slower. Sometimes it's not always, because when we think about nature, when nature wants to be a force of nature, it's doing what it's doing really quickly. But this is it. It's grieving the false sense of control.
Grieving the false sense of control. And I loved how you so beautifully shared the complexities of it, because we are born into these systems. That's all for a lot of our life that we know, that we have ever known. And also that there are those sides of it that are difficult to let go of, even if there is the sides that we know are toxic and we're like, okay, just get rid of that right now. And I think that what you're speaking to so powerfully is something that I love, that we just literally went straight off in the deep end in this conversation, because actually it feels like a conversation that is so crucial for our times. And that's what, when I was reading your book, what I absolutely loved was it really rooting into your personal story, into those reflections of toxic positivity, and actually the fact positivity, productivity, and positivity.
Indeed.
But the fact that toxic productivity is something, I remember you said at one point in your book that is laid down into us when we are a little embryonic egg in our grandmother, in our mother's embryonic wombs, and the fact that it runs so deep. So I'd love to hear from you as well. How has this journey been of coming to these realizations and being able to move through, to be able to cultivate a life that you shared? At some points it's slower, but then at the points where we need to go into that force of nature speed that we can, but there is much more, again, as you speak about in your book, much more cyclical and much more honoring of us. Like, how's that journey been for you? Was there resistance?
Oh my gosh, there's still resistance. There's always resistance. This stuff is so deeply encoded, it becomes our default. So, one of the things I hope I was able to communicate in my book is that it's a journey of recovery. Like any addiction, you're always in recovery. Somebody who was addicted to illicit substances, they're never not an addict. They're in recovery from that addiction. And they have to be very mindful because it is possible for relapse. And for some people, relapse is inevitable. I relapse all the time. When I'm in a state of panic or scarcity, or if it looks like things aren't going to work out the way I want them to, my default is to overfunction. It is to work, work, work. It is to literally have my laptop by my side. So first thing in the morning, I wake up, I can be on it, and everything I do is oriented towards working too much, overfunctioning, overdoing, pleasing, fawning, all of that kind of behavior. So it's not something that, oh yeah, I'm on a lily pad now, I no longer do that. It's still very much part of my life. But the difference is I'm aware of it. I know that pattern, and I can either preempt when it's going to happen and put things in place, or I can tell before I've gone too far down the line so I can reel myself back in and put some boundaries, put some parameters in place to prevent me from going right off the deep end. But I tell you, January was very much, I didn't realize it at the time, was very much a month of toxic productivity. And I know that I was absolutely spent. And I just recall working in bed a lot of the time. And I felt like my zest for life had dwindled, but I was trying to overfunction my way out of it. And once I recognized how many times I was literally getting up, making breakfast, having a conversation with my daughter in the morning and ending up back in bed, I recognized something was happening. And it was like, I say to my clients, sometimes I've got to you just grab your mindset. Like when a child, you can see they're running into the road. You're not going to say, oh, Johnny, stop. You have to run and grab Johnny so he doesn't end up into the road. Literally having to grab my mindset and say, no, we are not doing this, and almost be a bit like a military commando so that I can start to get back into my body instead of just living at the very top of my mind, and start to care for myself, because I am a human being that has a right and a duty to care for myself. So that is okay. It's March now, but that was just the other day. January was the other day. So I want everybody to take from this that this is something that will happen over and over again, and we don't get out of it by being hard on ourselves. So whilst I was grabbing my mindset and saying, no, there wasn't, you know better than this, you've done this before, there was none of that. It was like, cool, this is where we are. We need to do a emergency break, a harsh stop and a reset. And it was things like making sure that I'm getting out, going for walks. It doesn't matter if it was at first, I'm literally forcing myself, and it's around my road and back again. It's that slow cumulative building back up rather than trying to yank myself from 0 to 100, which is going to end up giving me whiplash.
I love that. I love that analogy as well of like, if a kid runs out into the road, what you would do, because I have so much resistance at times, and then subconsciously will be like, oh wow, how did I get to this place where I've just said yes to everything, every single project and all of that stuff. And I think that it's what I can feel, and what you just shared so powerfully is there's that emergency break, but then there's that real gentle, that building up, and that compassionate approach. Because I don't know about you, but
both.
Yeah, you need both. Yeah, because I feel even sometimes on Saturdays, I feel loads of resistance when it comes to me getting off my phone and doing yoga and things like that. So I think that to your point, we need to come with that gentleness and that compassion, as well as I love the fact that it's just that perspective of, for all of us, it's a lifelong journey. I always veer away from anything that feels like you're listening to a guru who seems like they're, those types of people that sort of market themselves like they're quote unquote perfect, because it's not. It doesn't exist. We're all humans, and we're all unlearning that which is conditioned to us through our culture, our society, the systems in which we live in. Let's talk boundaries, because my reflections on boundaries is just how unboundaried we all are. It's just not taught. I don't think I was ever taught as a child in school at any point. We're kind of taught to be unboundaried. So I'd love to hear from you just how important Well, firstly, let's speak about what are boundaries, and actually how can we bring boundaries in to help us to use, speak about this a lot in your book, to thrive in life.
So boundaries are like rules, a code of conduct for yourself. They guide how you live, and for boundaries to work and for them to be effective, they need to be guided by your values and also your strengths. So, firstly, what I will say is that we live in a society that relies on all of us humans not having boundaries. We live in a society that encourages codependency, especially for women. Women are celebrated for being selfless. They're celebrated for going above and beyond and even neglecting themselves for other people. Womanhood and martyrdom are totally conflated. And a woman that has boundaries, so a woman that says, no, not right now, I'll be able to do that and at such and such time, is considered to be selfish. So we're taught from a very young age. I use this example all the time, and it is very gendered. Children and how they're taught to share, especially when you're a girl. So it will be, I remember there was an occasion where friends came round when our children were very little. And my daughter was in the living room, and she had just, as the doorbell rang, she had just picked up a toy to start playing with it. And then the friends came. Immediately, one of the friends made a beeline for the toy my daughter had in a room full of toys. And my friend's response was to tell my daughter it's nice to share. And I said, she's just got it. She's just started playing with it. There are lots of other toys. When she finishes her turn, she will share. And the reason I did that, and I know that it rubbed my friend up the wrong way, the reason I did that is because from a very young age, children are taught, you have got this thing that you're enjoying. You've just got it. There are lots of other options, but because that person wants what you've got, you must give it to them because it's kind, and that's how we're good. That's how we're rewarded for being good. So what we're teaching children from a very young age is better for you to feel bad than it is for you to look bad in the eyes of another. And then that is built upon, built upon, built upon throughout life.
Wow.
So we start to do things like, oh, I'm just going to go to this event and show my face because I don't want to look bad. So you feel like shit, basically. You're knackered. You just had a really hard time. But because you don't want that person to perceive you as bad, whatever that means, you're going to go. So we end up in situations where we're half-assing. We're half-assing our present. We're doing presenteeism. We're not there because we really want to be there and we really want to support you. And don't get me wrong, there are sometimes we need to pull it out the bag and show up to people. That is what being in right relationship with people is about. That's what's being in community. But if your bog standard is, oh my goodness, I don't really want to, but I have to, even though it doesn't align with me anymore, that is self-abandonment. That's not having a boundary. And the boundary is not, I've told that person I'm not coming, but they've invited me. They're not upholding my boundary. That's not a boundary. You're trying to make rules for other people. That doesn't work. Your boundary is, I've decided I knew I was going to have a grueling week at work this week. So I have decided that this weekend, I am going to just go for walks in my local area. I'm going to read books and I'm going to drink soup. I'm going to eat soup and, drink warm drinks and have a lovely time. So if anybody invites me anywhere, my boundary that I'm upholding is, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm not going to be able to make it on this occasion, but please let me know when you're doing it again or when there's another version. You don't have to start explaining to people, I've had a really hard week and I'm really tired. You don't need to do all of that. It's about you upholding your boundary. One of the reasons we don't do that is because we're the most pro-social creatures on this planet. Whether we recognize it or not, we depend on our connections with other people. We might not depend on it in a way that we did in historic times, but we are not designed to survive on our own, much less thrive. So what we can end up doing is, I'm not going to say no to that person because I suspect if I say no to that person, they're going to think I'm bad and they're not going to like me anymore. We don't want to risk that. But the truth is, if we really get radically honest with ourselves, anybody that tramples over your boundaries, i.e., you said, I'm not able to make it, let me know the next one. Oh, just come. Why don't you come? Why don't you come? Why don't you come? We have to start to ask ourselves, is that a person that is available for me being who I am? And then we have to make powerful decisions. If that person is not available for me being who I am, and I have to squash myself into my version, into their version of who they want me to be, is that a relationship I can actually be in a place of wholeness and health? And if I'm conforming to that standard, it's very likely then that I'm expecting that from other people. So we're all walking around having half relationships, disingenuous relationships with people, because we have learnt that relationships are all about squashing and tolerating and conforming, as opposed to not just acceptance. I embrace, Tanya, that you are the sort of person that needs 2 weeks' notice. You're not the sort of person that appreciates me calling you on Saturday afternoon to say, let's do this on Saturday evening. If I embrace you, I embrace that about you. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to invite you. It might mean that I say, Tanya, I acknowledge that you prefer having more notice, but I just got a spare ticket to XYZ and I wonder if you want to come. That's such a different approach to our relationship. It means then that I understand who and how I am. I understand who and how you are, and we can both pour into a relationship that's spacious enough to accommodate who and how we both are, rather than who and how we are being opposing each other.
Oh, wow.
And it takes a lot of practice, and it feels clunky at first. And it does mean that there are some, I've got a very long-standing relationship that was a very, very close relationship. That relationship is now a relatively distant relationship because it got to a point where we both realized, oh, our needs are so different now. Our values are so different now. We can't actually pour into this cup in the same way it was previously. Therefore, and it was painful. And it was something that occurred over a number of years. It took about 4 years for us to get to a place to accept we can't force this. Because if we do, what we're actually doing is trying to force each other to be who we need to be. And we're not in a place where we're able to accept each other for who we are. So that just means we're not aligned anymore.
Wow. Such a powerful example of where sometimes, and actually in my experience, oftentimes when we set boundaries, not always, don't make it sound like you're going to lose all your, but I have had similar situations where actually it's that realization there isn't that alignment. But I loved when you shared as well, it's practice. And I love that, much the same as I always think of practicing presence, or you practice mindfulness, whatever it is, that it is, because actually it's also really uncomfortable in our world, in our societies, in how we're brought up. Again, that thing of that fawn response, that please and appease. We're taught to not speak up, to not speak our truth. And I've seen Dr. Gabor Mate talking about this, but I think for me, when I think about my hypothyroid, I'm like, there's no coincidence I've got hypothyroid when I haven't been speaking my truth for the majority of my life, and not able to feel like I could set that, or even understanding that boundaries are a thing that I could set. And I think that really goes into our systems, our structures, and everything that we're again, it's that thing of us just being, you've got to be, whether it's good workers or a good part, or whatever it is, there's all of those societal expectations that's all interwoven. But what I could hear from what you were sharing is, as much as it can feel really big, the work that's needed on our systems, actually we can be the individual change by way of how we move through this world. Absolutely. How we set our boundaries, how we speak our truth.
Yeah, it's like going to the gym. It's like, or exercising or whatever. Yeah. You don't go once and expect to be fit for life. It's a practice. So we have to do it over and over again. And the beauty of how our biology is designed, when we are doing our own personal practice, our own strength training, we have got a bigger capacity to carry more. So in my book, I've got a diagram which it is my 360 system care model, because human beings, when our needs are met and we're no longer in survival or worrying that we're not going to meet our needs, we have a bigger capacity. And the way we're designed, that capacity, as it expands, it naturally starts to expand to include other people. So when you think about different things that are going on in the world, like our sense of social justice and social change, when it's either that things are so diabolical, we have to take action, or our needs are met and we are able to extend that grace to others. So when we think about people who do philanthropic efforts, because they've made so much money, they can't do anything else with that money, they start to invest in causes they believe in. There are some people who do it in really problematic ways, but generally speaking, it's because, okay, I am so satisfied now, there's nothing else I can do, so let me share that with other people. So our natural tendency is, when our needs are met, we can then start thinking about the needs of others. I remember when I first started working, and I was bloody broke, and I just about had enough money to buy my lunch, and there was a beggar outside the place I was buying my lunch from. I literally didn't, I can see myself, it was in Uxbridge. I literally didn't have the money to be able to give that person any money. I literally didn't. Like, when I was at zero, I was at minus, right? So there was nothing there. And I decided that as soon as I was in a position to be able to, I would. And I don't do it all the time, but I will. There was the other day, I was in Liverpool Street Station, and there was a lady who was begging for money. She really, it was freezing cold. Her clothing wasn't appropriate for the weather, and people were tutting. She was getting in their way, and she approached me. I didn't have any cash. I honestly didn't. And I just looked at her and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and get that cash out. I went out, I got £10, I gave it to her. There was a part of me thinking, oh, bloody hell, I hope she doesn't go and buy drugs with it. But I thought, no, I am going to trust that you're going to do what's best for you with this money. The sense of relief on that woman's body, like she motioned towards me. She did not look like she had washed in days. How could she? She didn't have a way to live. I mean, she needed a hug. I just hugged her. I thought, whatever, if I get ringworm, I'll just get it treated or whatever. But I know that's what she needed at that time. And I had it to spare. So I vowed to myself that if I had it, I would be able to share it. I was able to do that because my financial needs were met enough for me to be able to go to the cash point, get that money out and give it to her. It's not because I'm special.
Yeah.
Obviously I am, but it's because I'm a human being, and that's how we operate. When I was a social worker, one of the things I was very, very careful about, regardless of the circumstances the family was in, was to remember that the vast majority of the parents were not caring for their children adequately because they were not cared for adequately. They didn't know how to care for themselves adequately themselves. But when we are, our natural tendency is we go from self-care to social care, because self-care without social care is futile. We cannot really be in a position of where we feel cared for and nourished if as soon as you walk out of the door, there's somebody who is homeless and doesn't have any food to eat. That doesn't, even if it's subconscious, that doesn't feel good. And when we're able to do that social care, we're then able to look at the environment in which we live and say, do you know what? We need to look after environments. So in my neighborhood, that looks like the local council, due to successive governments that are just in all this austerity for the sake of austerity, they don't look after. We've got a lovely little walkway with a stream and this and that. They don't look after it the way they're supposed to. So there are various times in the year that we as a community come together, whether it's in October, planting the bulbs for spring, whether we are clearing rubbish out of the stream so that it can run freely. These are the sorts of things we do because we've decided to come together as a community and look after each other. Our values don't all align. Like, where I live is a very conservative area. Where I live, it's lots of old people. So there's lots of mismatch in like generational values and beliefs and stuff like that. But we all know that in order for us all to thrive the best we can, we need to come together. It's not just about looking after my garden, it's also looking about the environment we all share together. And then that also is part and parcel of how we look after our planet.
Oh, I love that. Individual, community, social, environment, and actually it's
Yeah.
all interconnected, and it's
Yeah.
so powerful. I feel like this is the antidote for the very individualistic world, and it's something
Yeah.
where we've got billionaires who could literally solve world hunger and all sorts of things in a second and still
Yeah.
probably be a
Without
billionaire.
taking away from their day to day and
Yeah.
their long term experience.
Yeah, exactly that. But I think what I really connected in as you were sharing that is to the hope that we can all have, because I think when we are grieving the fact that our systems are not what we are brought up to believe, and actually they're not that, whether it's like the safety net. I mean, I feel like we've come to the point where our systems are no longer even the safety net, let alone something that's going to uplift us
Yeah.
to all of our dreams. But I think what I could feel in what you shared there is actually forget about council. There's agency that we can have in community through
Absolutely.
how we move, through how we inspire. And actually, what was really beautiful was that, you know, I live also in a very conservative area too. That's not in alignment with me. But I think that was so beautiful what you shared around the fact that actually that's where these bridges can also be, because we realize that when it comes down to it, the things that matter, having a beautiful stream and bit of
Yeah.
nature where we can go to, all of these things,
Yeah.
the stuff that we can all get on board with and also all connect over. And
Mhm.
I love, for me it's around where we feel like where we acknowledge where there's these griefs. It's saying, okay, what are the rebirths, what are the opportunities that come through? And what I connected in from what you shared, because oftentimes I tie myself in knots over how existential the griefs that I too feel for our systems, for the world, for the environment, etc. But that just reconnects us into that hope, into that agency, and to say it's not hopeless. We all have things that we can and we should be doing to be able to help to drive that change.
Yeah. We're all individual parts of one whole. If we can remember that, like I will always say, um, an oak tree is massive in comparison to a daisy, but they both contribute to the ecosystem. So if we can, it's not about, so some people will talk about, like I see things on TikTok where people, particularly around the US election, where people were saying, well, we can be in relationship if we just don't talk about our politics. Actually, that is what keeps us in silos. What we need to do is have those conversations. I may never, ever understand why somebody would vote for something that takes rights away from so many people. But I want to understand you as a human being. We talk about connection all the time, like it's this wonderful kumbaya thing. Actually, connection is incredibly hard. Connection means within all of this, I'm going to look for points where we do have an element of connection because we have a shared humanity, and see what we can create within that space. It doesn't mean we don't get me wrong, there are some things that we're like, no, that's a hard no. That is just so against everything. But if my neighbor believes that after school clubs shouldn't be funded because there's not enough funding for the old people's community center, it's like, no, it's not a zero sum game. Both of those things serve a purpose, and we need both of those. What can we do to find something that is going to enable both of those to continue? And there's lots of research that says you should actually just smush them together, because young people being in an environment with old people has benefits for both parties. So it's like, we have got to tap into our imagination and think beyond. It's not just think bigger, because when we think bigger, we have a tendency to just big up what's going on already. What if we think beyond that? Or if we think about what you just said about rebirth, what if we think beyond that and rebirth what used to happen when it was all ages and stages together in community, everybody having a vital role to play rather than being segregated in all of these different ways?
Oh, I love that. Because what that shows is, I remember my grandparents when the first zero waste shops came to London, and I was so excited and I was telling them about it, and they're like, sounds just like all the shops that we had when we were
Literally,
younger. So I love
literally.
that because actually it's not an acknowledgement to say everything's broken, we need to burn it all to the ground and start again. It's that reconnection to that which that those rebirths that can come through of actually
Absolutely.
there was that time where elders were revered and everyone had their roles and it was much more connected. I love
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
It brings me in a world that does feel very stressful right now with the news cycles and everything that's going on that is gonna amp up anyone's nervous system. That does bring me hope.
Yeah.
But with nervous system in mind, because you are trained as a somatic coach, you bring that into everything that you do. And I would love as well to speak to you because I think when we are feeling grief at what is going on in the world, at our systems, also about just all of those barriers and everything that I think so many of us feel like we're facing in life. Nervous system is key. You talk about this in your book. So I'd love to hear just from you around how can we be able to on the daily just support ourselves again in that way where we're conditioned to just keep going and to ignore those. You write so beautifully about this in your book where we just ignore all of the warning signs that our body, we are disconnected from listening to our bodies when I think there was one point in your book where you said our bodies they don't care about the whether it's the designer handbags or that promotion, that extra project. They just care about the fact that we're listening to them and taking action on our body's wisdom. So I'd love to hear a little bit around this somatic work that you do.
So if we think about grief, our society conditions us to be neutral. Neutral, the neutral affect is revered. So when people talk about nervous system regulation, they talk about calm, and they talk about calm as being this almost flat, steady state. Now, if you look at our heartbeat, right? If our heartbeat was in a flat, steady state, we would be dead. We're supposed to go up and down, right? So I talk a lot about our autonomic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that controls lots of like automatic functions that we don't have to think about. Heart rate, how we breathe, how our organs function. And it's even things like I'm experiencing joy, I'm experiencing pleasure, I'm in a state of fear, I'm in a state of shock. We don't have to think, this thing has happened, so now I need to be in shock. It just happens. We don't have to think, oh, I'm looking at a beautiful rose and it's connecting with my heart, and now I feel warm and fuzzy. We don't have to think about that. It automatically happens. And so we've got our autonomic ladder, which is a predictable hierarchy in which our nervous system functions. So the oldest part of our autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic dorsal branch of our nervous system, which is where we go to when we shut down, when we hide. And that is whatever we were before we were whatever we were before we became humans. When we weren't able to run, when we weren't able to fight, our protection mechanism as whatever amoeba we were was to hide, was to freeze, was to hide, was to shut down so that we would avoid danger by that. Then the next branch of the autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. That is our get up and go branch. So in our healthy state, it enables us to wake up in the morning. It enables us to be ambitious, have motivation. In a survival state, in a dysregulated state, it's that fight or flight response. I need to fight to protect myself, or I need to get out of dodge to protect myself. And then the newest branch of the autonomic nervous system is the ventral part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all about safety and connection and belonging. So that is where we want to be all the time, but it's not possible because we're not supposed to be like that. So not just throughout the week, but all throughout the day, we are up and down that autonomic ladder. That is normal. That's how we're supposed to be. And one of the things that diminishes and prevents us from being the human beings we are is that it's not convenient for modern society for us to be up and down the ladder. So it tries to normalize this state of quote unquote calm. Because when you're calm, when you're not reacting to things, you can be programmed to get up at the same time every day, go to work, do the same thing in every way, get an incremental promotion, acknowledgement, and just keep repeating the cycle. It means that when something unjust happens, we feel shame that we're angry about it because we've been told that anger is bad. When we're really joyful and jubilant about something, we can feel shame because we're told that that's really childish. Or we can think, oh, I don't want to be in that state for too much because it can just come and be taken away. The rug will be pulled from underneath me. So we try to come back to this state of neutrality. So we have all of these subconscious conditions that create a subconscious societal contract that says you are going to aim to be neutral all the time. You can be happy for a moment, but you've got to come back to calm. You can experience grief for a moment, but you've got to come back to calm. If you're in grief for too long, you're not doing it right. And now you're making me feel uncomfortable. And we must avoid making people feel uncomfortable at all costs. So we're constantly suppressing, constantly suppressing, constantly suppressing.
Wow.
Right? So shame, Brené Brown has done her wonderful research into shame, and she talks about how shame can't survive when we're in connection. So rather than saying to somebody, no, you've been grieving for far too long now, it's making me uncomfortable because it's making me start to face the things I've packed away because I don't want to be a burden to people and I don't want to be a burden to myself. We pack it away and it just leaks out all over the place. Whereas if we say, okay, we're going to provide some containment, we're going to hold space for this, you're going to have some time for this, it might not be the time you need because we can't always work on our biological time frame in a system that is capitalistic, to be quite frank. We need to make money. We need to do everything we need to survive as humans in our system requires money. But it means instead of shutting you down and saying, this is making me feel uncomfortable, it is, Tanya, let's go and sit in the break room for 10 minutes and have a chat about this. And then understanding our nervous systems and understanding the stress cycle, we're going to do something to shake it off rather than like squash it back down so that you have a bit of a relief. You have a bit of a release. So it might be that we talk about this thing and it doesn't necessarily mean like we're not always in a place where we can be the mammals we are and physically shake it off. But it would mean that we're having this conversation. When my aunt suddenly died in 2020, it was a huge shock. And the way that we would acknowledge that and then have our release was thinking about how jolly and jubilant she was. So we would have that moment, and then I would think about something that would make me laugh. Just that little acknowledgement and that little change in my physiological state gave me enough of a release and relief to continue. I wasn't like, yeah, I've had this moment, I've got to stuff it back down. And when I think about that cycle, we're talking about 15 minutes. But because we live in this society that is based on lack, 15 minutes feels like it's too long. We've got a 7-hour work day. You've got to have your lunch break. So 15 minutes is too long. Yeah. So it means now I'm working throughout my work day in a manner that is slow. I'm distracted. I'm sloppy. I'm not doing my best work because we couldn't give 15 minutes to acknowledge this. And that is how we don't have to do these big grand things. We don't need to go on a retreat. We don't need to be going to have ayahuasca. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do these things, but the things we do on the micro, on a day by day, week by week, moment by moment basis, they have a compounding impact. So if we look at the structure and the organization of work, if you know that you're going through a crappy time, but if you go into work and you need to have a moment, you will be able to have that moment. You're less likely to phone in sick because you're able to be supported in that time and still carry on. And when we think about things like grief or these other things that cause us shame and cause us to go into that dorsal shutdown, shutting ourselves off from other people, if we're in an environment where we're able to get like a slice of toast of that thing, we're not going to be starving and then end up shut down. So we're going to be in an environment where we've got purpose because we're doing our work, we're doing something that is purposeful. We've got connection because we've got people around us that don't just see us as a cog in a machine. They're actually saying, within the context of our organizational structure, I care for you and I'm going to provide you with some support. So when you go home, you'd have been in an environment where you're moving your body instead of just holding all of that stress in. You'd have had some kind of connection and you would have done something, because I'm not against productivity. In my book, there's a chapter called Be Naturally Productive, because we are naturally productive and we need it, but we're operating within the bandwidth of our natural productivity instead of expecting ourselves to be high productivity all the time, which is what leads to our demise. So in summary, what I want to say is, when we can give ourselves these micro moments of connection and not say, oh my gosh, I haven't got enough time. We've got, when I'm talking about the cycle of work, we've got the whole work day. You can afford to give somebody 15 minutes. When we talk about our friendship, if that one friendship link up is dominated by somebody who's trying to work out something that's going on in her relationship, let's not rush and say, oh yeah, but you got to be grateful. Oh yeah, but what about this? Oh, you should just dump him, which is often what is going on in my mind. Just dump him. We've got to hold space for that person to process, knowing that this is one link up in the whole scheme of our friendship. We can afford to give this person this time. Now, if the person is going on and on and on and on, and you're like, do you know what? This has been the cycle for 5 years. You need to do something about, like, this is too much. But we need to just recognize we can give people a little bit of space so that we're providing them with the support they need, rather than trying to hurry them on because we want to be positive, we want to be calm, we want to be productive.
Oh, I love that. The power of just that little bit of space, 15 minutes. That's all it is, the micro, but
Yeah,
actually being able to prioritize that. I love that, because what I can feel is that essence of the community connection, that care that can come in, as well as then those spaces where actually we can and we should take agency, because to that point of being able to have a beautiful non-machine like productivity that is in alignment, actually we will flow better if we take
absolutely.
those 15 minutes to go out for a walk or
Hmm.
whatever it is,
Hmm.
and to allow ourselves to be with ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's so, so powerful, Tamu. Thank you. So before we bring our conversation to a close, I have one question that I ask every single guest, and that is, if you could write a note to a past version of yourself from where you're sitting now, what words of wisdom, of comfort, of advice would you share with your past version of self?
Oh my goodness. The first thing that comes to mind is, you're not bossy, you're a great leader. Yeah, I'm just thinking about different points in time, especially it's very gendered. Girls are often like, you're very bossy. But no, actually, I it's a combination of nature and nurture, but I'm a natural nurtured leader. So all of that nonsense that made me pull back and play small, no, actually, you weren't being bossy. You're just a very good leader and you've got good organizational skills.
Love that. You're a very good
And I would
leader.
write that to my 4-year-old self. Obviously, I would use language that's appropriate for 4 years old, but I have memories of this particular nursery nurse called Linda, who would tell me about being bossy in nursery.
Wow. And that just shows how deep it
Mhm.
goes, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, those voices that then get laid down into our inner dialogue. Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Answering Linda from all those years ago. Wow,
Yeah.
Tamu. Yeah, I think that is something where these labels get put up on us. And it's just, and particularly for us as women, it's something that is so, there's so many labels that we just need to
Absolutely.
be aware of, and then be able to slowly relearn actually
Yeah.
the truth that you are a great leader, and those are
Thank you
leadership
so much.
qualities.
Yes, I am.
You are. So tell me, before we bring the conversation to a close, I'd love to hear from you of where can anyone tuning in, where can they find you? How can they work with you? Anything that you wish to share in this space?
The best place to find me is my playground, Instagram, and I am there, tamu.at tamu.thomas. And in relation to my work, at the moment, I am in a period of transition. So, what I will say is if you are a service-based entrepreneur or professional, so you're a mentor, consultant, psychologist, coach, or you are a leader in a corporate environment, so you manage a lot of people, so service is a part of your work, and you want to expand your work and you want to be recognized and paid for your thoughts, you want to step into thought leadership, you've got a body of work you want to share with people, you want to have an impact that is bigger than your immediate audience, I am developing a body of work to support people to add into their work ecosystem thought leadership. So join my mailing list and you will be the first to know, because yes, we can work really hard all week and have an impact, or we can take all the things we're constantly learning, package them up, put on a nice suit, do our hair nicely, do our faces the way we like our faces to be done, and get paid pretty much the same amount of money for sharing that on a stage somewhere and having a huge sense of purpose and impact. So I'm supporting with people with developing those types of bodies of work.
Oh, I love that, Tamu. And I think, well, having seen you on massive, massive stages, I know that you are the one who is blazing that path as a leader. And I'd also say your socials are just brilliant. There's so much by way of practical guidance, but also the realities. I think we're in a coaching industry where there's a lot of people denying the realities of this world. And the wonderful thing is that actually where you come in is very much let's shine a spotlight on everything, whether it is social justice, whether it's what's going on to our planet, etc.
Yeah.
You don't shy away from that. But what I've really connected into in our conversation is there's agency, there's hope for us all, and that's everything that I've read through your book and through all of your work. So Tamu, for today's conversation and for everything that you do, I'm so grateful to you, and I cannot wait to just see where you flow in your leadership in this life.
Thank you so much. And thank you for creating a space to have such meaningful conversations about a topic we've been taught to fear. I really appreciate this space.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside. And we'll never make it, and we'll never break.